when quiet continuation becomes uncomfortable. There is a level of discipline that makes people uneasy around you. Not because you are loud. Because you continue when there is no audience. Morning arrives without ceremony. Hands reach for the same worn fabric. Cold air fills the lungs. The body moves before permission is granted. No music. No ritual of encouragement. Just the floor beneath bare feet and the weight of another ordinary day. Someone nearby notices. They say nothing. The silence lingers anyway. Most people believe discipline is fueled by desire. They wait for the right mood. They wait to feel aligned. They wait until effort feels justified. That belief is why their routines fracture. You've seen it happen. Strong starts. Clean intentions. Then absence. A skipped day that invites another. The chain breaks quietly, and no one mentions it. A different pattern exists. Old temples understood it. So did men who carried blades for a living. Continuation was never announced. It was assumed. Practice happened whether the body agreed or resisted. Sleeves stiff with cold. Breath shallow. Knees folding to the mat the same way each time. Others watched and felt an unnamed pressure. Consistency exposes excuses without speaking. This path does not reward explanation. Friends ask why you never adjust. Why you don't rest like everyone else. You tie the belt anyway. The question dissolves in the repetition. Quiet continuation becomes a presence that unsettles softer rhythms. Before you continue reading, name the habit you abandoned last year. If nothing comes to mind, that absence is already answering for you. The man who always returns without announcement. Let me tell you about someone like you. He sets the alarm without drama. The sound cuts through shallow sleep. Heavy eyelids resist. Dry mouth. A dull ache in the legs from yesterday that never fully left. He sits up anyway. The room is cold. The floor colder. His feet touch it without pause. Somewhere in the apartment, someone turns over in bed, irritated by the noise. He does not apologize. He moves. He is not confused about what to do. The clothes are folded the same way every night. Hands reach. Fabric slides over skin that hasn't warmed yet. Shoulders tighten as the day begins to press in early. Outside, the street is quieted enough to hear his own breath. He steps into it without checking how he feels. That question never arrives. It has learned not to. He has tried motivation before. Everyone has. He remembers those weeks clearly. New plans. Sharp intentions. Friends noticed then. They asked what changed. He explained too much. Words stacked on top of effort. When fatigue came, it came with arguments. When rain fell, the debate began. One missed day turned into permission. The body learned a different lesson, that everything was optional. Now there is less conversation inside him. Not because he is stronger. Because the routine does not ask. He trains at the same hour even when the air bites the lungs. Even when fingers are stiff and clumsy. Even when the pulse takes longer to settle. Neighbors see him pass every morning. One jokes that he is too rigid. Another stops inviting him to late nights. He nods and keeps moving. Social warmth fades. The rhythm remains. There is a quiet danger in intelligence. He knows this. Smart people negotiate well. They find reasons. They adjust. He did that once. Now the belt is tied before the mind starts bargaining. Knees fold. Breath counts return when resistance rises. The floor is cold, he kneels anyway. No ceremony. No reward. Others imagine discipline as force. They picture strain, teeth clenched, a man pushing himself forward. What they don't see is the opposite. The absence of choice. The relief of not deciding. His body expects this hour. When it doesn't happen, something feels wrong, like leaving the house without shoes. That discomfort pulls him back faster than motivation ever did. People around him feel it without naming it. Conversations shorten. Jokes land softer. His predictability unsettles them. He is no longer available for excuses disguised as flexibility. He continues quietly, and that continuation exposes the gaps in others without accusation. This is where most people misunderstand what they are watching. They think consistency is an achievement. They do not realize it has already replaced something else inside him. And once that replacement is complete, there is no returning to negotiation, where morning negotiations quietly kill momentum. This is where most mornings collapse. Not in failure. In conversation. The alarm sounds. The body registers it before thought. Heat behind the eyes. A pulse that hasn't settled from the night. For a moment, everything is still possible. Then the negotiation arrives. Just today. Just 5 more minutes. The room is warm. The floor will be cold. He lies there, staring at nothing, and feels the first fracture form. Somewhere nearby, someone else sleeps on, unaware that a small war has already begun. He has lived here before. He knows the pattern. The body wants continuity. The mind wants permission. When the two meet, the mind usually wins by offering comfort dressed as reason. He feels the weight of the blanket, the ease of staying horizontal. Shoulders soften. Breath slows. The body waits for instruction that does not come. Outside, the morning continues without him. On days like this, he notices how quickly identity loosens. One skipped action, and the spine of the routine bends. The next choice feels heavier. The floor feels colder than usual. The idea of beginning now feels awkward, almost embarrassing. He imagines explaining it later. That imagination is enough to keep him still. Negotiation does not shout. It whispers until movement feels unnecessary. When he does rise late, the difference is physical. The body moves reluctantly. Fingers clumsy. Jaw tight. There is irritation without a clear target. Someone comments on his mood. He shrugs it off, but the friction remains. He knows what caused it. Not fatigue. Not lack of ability. A private concession that no one else witnessed. This is why the old forms removed choice entirely. Bells rang. Mats waited. Practice happened whether the body agreed or not. A monk did not ask if he felt ready. A warrior did not debate the weather. When rain fell, sandals were worn. When joints ached, movements shortened. The action remained. The negotiation never learned how to speak. He has begun to understand that every internal debate trains something. Either the habit of continuation or the habit of delay. The body remembers both. When delay repeats, the body grows skilled at resisting beginnings. When continuation repeats, resistance loses its voice. Not through force, but through neglect. The negotiation starves when it is never answered. People around him sense the shift when this happens. Mornings become quieter. Explanations disappear. He arrives unchanged regardless of conditions. Someone jokes that he is too serious lately. Another says he should relax more. He listens, nods, and continues. The absence of negotiation creates a presence that words cannot soften. Most never reach this point because they keep listening to the morning argument. They believe it is them. They don't realize it is a habit that has learned how to sound reasonable. And as long as that voice is entertained, continuation will always feel optional. What happens when that voice is no longer allowed to finish its sentence is something few are prepared for. When choice is removed, resistance loses its shape. The shift does not feel heroic. It feels mechanical. The same hour arrives. The body reacts before language forms. Stiff fingers close around fabric. The belt is tied with practiced tension. Breath is shallow at first, then steadies. There is no question of whether this will happen. The question has been removed. In its place is a narrow corridor of action that the body knows how to walk. This is where resistance changes texture. It no longer argues. It manifests as weight. Heavy eyelids. Tight shoulders. A dull ache that spreads slowly instead of sharply. He notices it without responding. Knees lower to the mat the same way every time. The floor is cold. The cold does not escalate. It simply exists. So does he. Earlier versions of himself believed freedom lived in flexibility. Options. Adjustments. That belief kept him busy. Every morning required a verdict. Every disruption demanded a new plan. He was always deciding, always explaining. People admired his thoughtfulness. They also watched him drift. Now there is less to admire and more to feel. His routine has edges. It does not bend to accommodate conversation. When the schedule breaks, there is no panic. A late meeting. A delayed train. The body does not spiral. It looks for the next available slot and moves there immediately. Intensity lowers. Continuity does not. Sweat comes slower. Muscles complain sooner. He accepts the reduction without commentary. Stopping entirely is no longer an option that presents itself. Others misread this. They think he is forcing himself. They offer advice. You should rest more. You're going to burn out. He hears concern layered over discomfort. His predictability has removed something they relied on, mutual inconsistency. When he does not waver, their own adjustments feel exposed. The room grows quieter around him. He notices the space and continues anyway. The body learns quickly when choices disappear. It stops staging protests that never succeed. Breath settles faster now. Movements smooth out even on bad days. The pulse steadies earlier in the session. There is less friction inside, even when the conditions worsen. Rain no longer signals debate. Fatigue no longer invites delay. These signals pass through him without attaching. This is the hidden economy of discipline. Every removed decision saves energy. Every fixed response reduces internal noise. Over time, the quiet becomes noticeable. Not peaceful. Efficient. He moves through mornings without dragging a committee of doubts behind him. That absence sharpens his presence in ways effort never did. People start to say he's changed. They can't point to a moment. Only a pattern. He arrives the same way regardless of circumstances. He leaves without explanation. The continuation has become visible, and visibility brings pressure. What most don't understand is that this pressure is not something he applies. It is something that forms naturally when choice no longer interferes. And once interference is gone, something else begins to take its place. Continuity survives what perfection cannot. There are days when the body refuses to cooperate. Not dramatically. Quietly. The joints feel thick. Muscles slow to answer. A low-grade ache sits behind the eyes and does not move. He notices it while tying the belt. Fingers fumble once, then correct. Breath feels shallow longer than usual. The room does not change in response. Neither does the hour. He steps forward with reduced force and no resentment. This is where most people disappear. They confuse interruption with failure. One imperfect session feels dishonest. One shortened effort feels pointless. They stop entirely to preserve an idea of themselves that requires excellence. He learned early that this idea is fragile. It breaks under weather, under fatigue, under ordinary life. Continuity does not require belief in good days. On these slower mornings, his movements are smaller. Knees lower more carefully. The floor feels colder because he notices it longer. Sweat comes late, then unevenly. Someone watching might think he is wasting time. Someone listening might hear irritation in his breathing. He does not correct either impression. He continues at a pace the body can sustain without bargaining. There was a time he would have skipped this. Called it recovery. promised to make up for it tomorrow. That promise used to feel responsible. It also trained absence. Now, even minimal effort keeps the chain intact. One sentence written. One round completed. One deliberate repetition. The body recognizes the signal immediately, we still do this. Others struggle to understand this restraint. They expect intensity or rest, nothing between. When he explains that he still showed up, they look unconvinced. A friend jokes that half effort doesn't count. He smiles briefly and returns to his rhythm. The joke lingers longer than the smile. Continuity unsettles people who rely on extremes to justify their pauses. The body adapts to this honesty. It learns that presence matters more than performance. Recovery accelerates because momentum never fully stops. The next morning arrives without the weight of restarting. There is no guilt to overcome, no story to repair. Just the familiar sequence. Fabric, breath, floor, movement. This is how rivers survive drought. They narrow. They slow. They do not argue with the terrain. When rain returns, they expand without needing to remember how. His practice follows the same law. Even when it becomes a trickle, it continues to move forward, carving the same path. People watching from the outside miss this entirely. They measure discipline by visible strain. They wait for proof of effort. What they fail to see is how fragile their standard is. Perfection demands conditions. Continuity only demands presence. And once presence becomes non-negotiable, even the worst days lose their power to interrupt. What replaces interruption is not strength, but something far less dramatic and far more difficult to undo: decisions made before friction ever appears. The failure rarely happens at the moment of impact. It happens earlier. He learned this after enough mornings went wrong in the same way. A late message. Sudden rain. A meeting that stretches longer than planned. Each time, the same pause followed. A moment where the body waited for instruction and the mind scrambled to decide. That scramble cost more energy than the work itself. So he removed it. Now the responses are already set. When the weather turns, training moves indoors without commentary. When exhaustion arrives, intensity drops but presence remains. When the schedule breaks, the next available window is taken immediately, even if it's imperfect. These responses live in the body now. They surface without debate. The moment friction appears, movement follows. This pre-decision changes how stress feels. There is still tension. The jaw tightens. Shoulders rise. Breath shortens under pressure. But there is no confusion layered on top. He does not stand still wondering what version of himself should act. The action has been chosen in advance. The body executes. The mind arrives later, quieter, to observe. People around him notice this most during disruptions. Others freeze, complain, or renegotiate plans aloud. He adjusts silently. A coworker asks how he stays so calm. He shrugs. Calm has nothing to do with it. He simply does not need to invent a response in real time. That absence of improvisation reads as composure. This also creates distance. Friends used to expect flexibility from him. Spontaneous changes. Late nights. Last-minute decisions. Now his boundaries feel firm without being stated. When plans interfere with his fixed hours, he declines without explanation. The room shifts slightly when he does this. Some respect it. Others feel dismissed. He accepts both outcomes and continues. The body responds positively to this predictability. Stress spikes lower. Recovery accelerates. Sleep deepens because there is no unresolved debate carried into the night. The nervous system recognizes the pattern and settles into it. Even when conditions worsen, the internal environment remains stable enough to function. Most people try to solve obstacles when they appear. They pride themselves on adaptability. What they don't see is how adaptation drains them. Every decision taxes attention. Every adjustment invites emotion. He removed that drain by deciding once, long before friction had a chance to speak. This does not make life smoother. It makes it simpler. Fewer words. Fewer internal meetings. More movement. The simplicity is unsettling to those who rely on complexity to justify inconsistency. They ask how he stays so disciplined. He does not answer. The question assumes something he no longer does. What matters is not that obstacles disappear. They don't. What changes is that obstacles stop interrupting continuation. And when interruption loses its leverage, something else begins to harden quietly underneath the routine, when the body moves before permission is given. The change is subtle at first. He notices it on a morning that offers resistance without excuse. No rain. No fatigue worth mentioning. Just a quiet reluctance that used to grow teeth. The alarm sounds. Eyes open. The body rises before the familiar argument can assemble. By the time the mind reaches for delay, the feet are already on the floor. Cold seeps into the soles. Breath sharpens. The window of negotiation closes without ceremony. This is when something irreversible begins. The body has learned the sequence too well. Fabric. Belt. Door. Street. Each action pulls the next one forward. There is no pause long enough for doubt to anchor. Muscles still complain. The chest still tightens in the cold. But these signals no longer control direction. They register, then dissolve into movement. The body leads. The mind follows at a distance. People imagine this moment as triumph. It isn't. There is no surge of confidence. No feeling of arrival. What he feels instead is neutrality. The absence of friction where friction used to live. That absence is unsettling at first. He notices it like missing noise. The silence forces him to confront a question he never had to answer before. If resistance no longer stops him, what does? Social reactions sharpen here. Others sense the shift before he names it. Conversations change tone. Friends hesitate before suggesting alternatives, already expecting refusal. Someone comments that he's become hard to read. Another says he seems detached lately. He hears the concern layered with distance. His consistency has crossed an invisible line where it no longer reassures. It challenges. The body responds to this new environment by tightening its patterns. Sleep arrives faster. Wake-ups grow cleaner. Even stress takes on a different shape. It no longer scatters attention. It compresses it. He moves through crowded days with fewer words and steadier hands. The pulse steadies quicker after spikes. Recovery happens inside motion instead of after collapse. This is the moment many undo themselves. The discomfort shifts outward. Instead of battling their own hesitation, they now face the unease of others. The pressure to explain. To soften. To reassure people that nothing fundamental has changed. He does not do this. He notices the urge, lets it pass, and continues. Explanation would reopen negotiation. The most dangerous thought arrives quietly. Maybe this is enough. Maybe the habit is secured. Maybe vigilance can relax. He feels it flicker during an easy morning, when everything aligns. The body executes flawlessly. Breath smooth. Movement clean. The temptation to admire it surfaces. He lets that pass too. Admiration invites interruption. What replaces resistance is not comfort. It is responsibility. When the body moves without permission, there is no one left to blame. No mood to accuse. No obstacle to negotiate with. Only the quiet demand to continue as before. And once that demand is internalized, the final shift begins, one that has less to do with action and more to do with how others experience his presence, the quiet pressure your consistency applies to others. The change becomes visible without announcement. He enters rooms the same way he enters mornings. No scanning. No adjustment. The body settles where it always does. Shoulders relaxed. Jaw unclenched. Breath steady from repetition rather than calm. Conversations bend slightly around him. Not because he dominates them, but because he does not mirror uncertainty back. People begin to test this without admitting it. Invitations come later than usual. Suggestions arrive framed as jokes. You'll probably say no. He hears it and nods once. The answer does not change. The testing slows. Predictability, once established, becomes heavier than explanation. It saves time for everyone involved, though few will thank him for it. This is where consistency stops being personal. His continuation creates contrast. Others feel it when they cancel plans, skip sessions, or renegotiate promises they made to themselves out loud. He does not comment. He does not compare. He simply continues. That silence does more than advice ever could. It reflects choices back to their owners without accusation. The body feels this shift too. There is a new kind of tension now, not inside the routine but around it. Social friction replaces internal resistance. Messages go unanswered. Invitations thin. A few people drift. A few stay and adjust. He notices the sorting without trying to manage it. Managing it would require explanation. Explanation would reopen old patterns. There are moments when loneliness brushes close. Not dramatic. Just a quieter phone. Fewer spontaneous conversations. He feels it in the chest briefly, like pressure that doesn't become pain. He keeps moving. Movement has already proven it can hold more than comfort. The routine does not shrink to accommodate feeling. Feeling adapts instead. What remains is a strange clarity. The day contains fewer decisions, fewer emotional spikes. Work sharpens. Rest deepens. Even conflict feels simpler. When challenged, he responds without heat. When ignored, he continues without resentment. The body has learned how to persist without needing feedback. This is the final inversion. Discipline no longer feels like something he protects. It feels like something that protects him. From drift. From negotiation. From the slow erosion that happens when life is treated as a series of exceptions. The routine stands between him and that erosion quietly, doing its work without asking to be acknowledged. Those who stay close eventually stop asking why he does this. They begin to understand that he is not proving anything. He is maintaining something. The maintenance itself becomes the message. Not spoken. Not posted. Lived. And here is the tension that remains unresolved. Once continuation becomes this stable, this visible, and this uncompromising, it leaves no room for return. The path behind him does not call. The only question left is whether this quiet pressure is something he can carry indefinitely without softening, when discipline is no longer something you perform. At some point, the language changes. Not out loud. Inside. Discipline stops feeling like an action you take and becomes a condition you live inside. The body no longer asks for permission. It expects continuity the way lungs expect air. When the hour arrives, movement follows. When it doesn't, something feels wrong, not emotionally, but structurally, like a joint out of place. This is where people misunderstand you most. They think you are rigid, obsessed, overcommitted. They don't see that nothing is being forced anymore. There is no tension in continuing. The tension existed only when negotiation was alive. Once it died, what remained was order. Quiet. Predictable. Durable. You no longer measure days by how hard they felt. You measure them by whether the chain remained intact. Some days are thin. Some are heavy. None are skipped. The body understands this agreement and returns the favor with steadier energy, cleaner focus, and fewer emotional swings. Even rest becomes deliberate instead of reactive. This is not strength. It is removal. The strongest person is not the one who pushes the hardest. It is the one who no longer debates. When choice disappears, discipline stops breaking. When discipline stops breaking, identity hardens without effort. You don't announce this shift. You don't defend it. You don't soften it to keep others comfortable. You continue quietly, and that continuation does all the speaking required. If this exposed something uncomfortable in you, name it publicly. One sentence. No explanation. Just the action you will no longer negotiate with.